Moving on, though, to another crime story today, and new Home Office figures have revealed that 6,000 crimes went unsolved every day last year, with just 6% of reported cases resulting in a suspect actually facing charges.
Yeah, those shocking stats come on the very same day that both the Tories and the Labour Party set out their plans to crack down on so-called zombie knives. New government legislation will be introduced today, aiming to finally outlaw the weapons after several failed attempts.
We have made it clear to the police that we expect them, in fact, we demand that they pursue every reasonable line of inquiry. When someone has been the victim of crime, they deserve to have a police response. We've made that very clear to the police leadership. That will be something that happens now as a standard, and we'll be holding the leadership of the police to account.
Dr Renee Hoenderkamp is still with us. I mean, this is all kind of connected, isn't it? You know, suddenly it's like almost like synergy. You know, you've got both Labour and the Tories coming out with their big plans to tackle knife crime, to go hard on people possessing knives and all that, and then we see what happened in Nottingham. The trouble with all this cracking down on zombie knives, which, as you said earlier, Alex, looked like they were manufactured in hell or something. Look, there they all are, and there are worse-looking ones than that. It's OK, you can stop people having these, but everyone can grab a carving knife from their kitchen cutlery drawer.
I mean, look, since 2015, 16 times they've said they're going to stop these knives being on the street. And again, it's almost like the bully dogs, isn't it? They're just focusing on one type of knife. Well, it isn't just one type of knife that kills people. Any knife kills people. What you need to do is stop the people at the end of the knife from having them. And I just don't understand this. I mean, I think it goes all the way back to Jack Straw, doesn't it, who was going to be tough on knives. There should just be two rules. If you're caught with a knife, you go to prison for 2 years, 5 years, I don't care. If you're caught selling a knife, you go to prison for 2 years, 5 years. End of story.
Zero tolerance.
One thing that I find astonishing, and it doesn't surprise me at all, that the Labour Party's way of addressing this, and they have actually said they're going to add ninja knives to the forbidden weapons list. Why they're not forbidden already, I don't know. But their way of addressing this is to extend the Sure Start scheme out to adolescents, and essentially it's a build more youth centres approach. Well, I keep hearing this excuse made, this concept that actually kids wouldn't carry knives if they could go and play tiddlywinks at the corner of the street or whatever. I think it's a nonsense, and given what we heard yesterday about the fact that the West might be facing actual physical wars of attrition in the way that we haven't for a century, makes me think, well, what is wrong with saying instead these kids, instead of having youth centres, should do national service?
Well, I think that's a really interesting idea, and, you know, I think that is something we should consider. But going back to the institutions being closed, we have the same thing, don't we? Do you remember Borstalls? Youth detention centres where naughty boys, and it was
remember
boys...
them, I did most of my schooling there.
Naughty boys were locked away and re-educated, and they tried to put them back on the straight and narrow. You're absolutely right. I think it's great if we give more facilities for teenagers, because we used to have a youth club to go to. They have nothing to do. But that doesn't mean, if they're well-parented, they need to pick up a knife and stab someone.
I'm not sure this argument that they have nothing to do holds true, because every time I'm walking around London, there's someone shaking a tin for, you know, music lessons, DJing classes to stop kids carrying knives, football teams to stop kids carrying knives, boxing centres to stop kids carrying knives. I mean, they've got Netflix, Amazon Prime, they've got more facilities than children have ever had, frankly, in terms of entertainment. And I think what's happened, actually, is we've gone really soft by, like you said, closing the Borstalls, by taking bobbies off the beat, by getting rid of stop and search, by getting rid of legislation that would throw people in clink for carrying a murder weapon, and then said, oh, do you know what we should do? Oh, they need youth hostels.
See, I don't think... I mean, youth clubs and all that, good idea, but what happens when you get these kind of murders and you get these debates about knife crime, which, by the way, is getting extremely worrying, particularly in London? You'll always get these mysterious people called community leaders, which they'll crop up on TalkTV as well as all the other channels, and they'll be going, yeah, what we need to do is build youth centres, give them somewhere to go. Well, yeah, as you say, Renee, fine, give them youth centres. Will that solve knife crime? Will it? Hell, it's the same old verbiage every single time, frankly, from the community leaders and the politicians. And I think you're right, Renee. If we really want to get to grips with this, you find a kid with a knife, walking down the street with a knife, he goes to jail.
Yeah.
End of.
But of course, we've got no places in jail, and therein lies the problem. So you know what? Use all these kids on the street to build new ones. Because if we haven't got enough jails, build new ones.
Well, shall we have a listen to what Idris Elba thinks needs to be done? Because he has spearheaded a campaign to get knives off streets. Brought out a song. Indeed, he has. Apparently so. But he's been doing the media rounds this morning about his campaign. Let's have a listen.
There's so many facets to this issue that need to be addressed, but banning them outright, the sale, manufacturing of them in our country is a step in the right direction, and I feel that's a good step. I think it's definitely at least a small win for the families, the victims that are sitting there wondering why our government hasn't done something like this earlier.
Well, that was Idris Elba talking to the BBC earlier, and frankly talking some good common sense, I would have thought. Do you agree?
Well, yeah, I mean, but then I think we're all fairly agog as to the fact that these extremely dangerous and horrific knives have been for sale this whole time, and I think since 2016, under Theresa May, they were supposed to be off our streets. But an interesting perspective on this, and it ties in, I think, to the whole narrative around mental health, schizophrenia. It seems to be a lot more people are suffering mental health issues than ever before. And anti-drugs protester Peter Hitchens would say, well, look, you walk around somewhere like London and the stench of cannabis is everywhere. You do a swab test of most of the bathrooms in office blocks, even in the Houses of Parliament, and traces of cocaine are everywhere. Is this feeding into the instability of people who then might go and pick up a knife and feel compelled to use it?
I mean, look, who knows? Cannabis is supposedly supposed to make them calmer. You know, they drive less aggressively, they act less aggressively, and most of them are using cannabis. I think what this shows us is that there is a massive drug world out there, and I think it's feeding into it that way because these kids are part of that culture.
The crime element.
It's territorial. They're having to defend themselves. They feel they need to. That, I think, is feeding it. So then you question whether or not we have lost the war on drugs, and it's time to address that as part of it too.
Oh, interesting.
I was going to facetiously say, you're talking about all this cannabis the kids are smoking and all the cocaine they're taking, and you said that there's nothing for the kids to do. There's plenty of drugs, for them to do out there. But I do think that drug use is something we need to look at. Because it is pretty pervasive among younger people.
Yeah. I see the mopeds everywhere, don't you, going around London, and they normally have these sort of boxes on the back and pretend they're delivering blood to hospitals.
There are far more important deliveries to make.